Cherry, yep.
But yeah, the smokiness kind of offsets that cherry. It makes the cherry a little. It just makes it a little funny. Like
You're
it's
right.
Not, it's sweet, but like not. But not like sweet. I don't. That was a terrible description. But it's got the fruit, but it's not
Tart. But it's not even that tart.
It's like almost like a spice to it. Like,
Yeah,
like it's
you're
like a
right.
spiced, like, spice drink or something.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know.
With my technical opinion.
Plummy.
Plummy.
But I'll be honest. I like it. I do. I like it.
What are the
What are the
specs
stats on it?
Well, let's start with to ponder the profound. Rich and complex, this tour de force is a blend of quadruple ale and authentic Belgian Creek. Its multi-depth and gentle sweetness enhanced by lively carbonation and a touch of cherry. The perfect beer for leisurely sipping and quiet contemplation. 9.7% alcohol.
Not bad.
That's okay.
She's making her way back.
So much for leisurely. Oops.
Oh, jeez. There's a lot left, bro. I actually might have a little bit more. This episode is sponsored by Uber and Lyft.
A phone call to my wife. Hey, do you mind? Bring someone else who can drive with you.
Bradley, so where do you see what are some things that you have learned? And we've asked this to our small business owners that we've had on the podcast, but I'm curious to get your answer to this question. What are some things that you've learned during this pandemic that you will actually probably take with you going forward? Have you learned, what are some things?
That's it's funny when you ask that. It's like almost like a train wreck of thoughts in my brain, because all it has been is learning. I joke with the staff. I'm like, this is the greatest moment of resume building we've ever seen, and I think one of the key things is that we can pair up our in-person events and we can produce stuff that also goes digital, and both of them have a different and equal benefit. That maybe we can do some things online and do some things digitally, and we don't have to be in person to do. Like, I teach class now. We teach classes now online. We teach a research class. You want to learn how to research your property. We have 3 courses. One teaches you how to research a residential, one teaches you how to research a business property, and one teaches you just it's like everything. Like, just here's all the resources, here was what to do for Clark County. And some of the stuff applies broader to Washington State and Oregon. And we'll never probably go back to teaching that in person. That was really a lot of unnecessary effort when we can just jump on and just show someone in real time on the computer. So just realizing there is a really broad digital landscape and a huge market out there for museums and history to be able to engage with, I think has been a huge piece for us. I think the other piece is, as a nonprofit, like I said, we get maybe 15% of our operating budget is stabilized, which is contribution from the county, which we are so grateful for. We are grateful the county provides that, but we're fighting and clawing for another 85% of everything every year, and going through this moment and seeing just the resolve of my staff, of the volunteers that are helping us, of our board, and then also just the immense amount of caring and support from the community has made us realize, we're going to be fine because we're doing our job, and we're providing what people expect, and we're not playing to this isn't my personal play tool. I always tell people that it's not my personal place to do whatever I want with. I'm a steward of resources that are owned by anyone who lives in this community. This stuff is yours, not mine. And I'm just a steward of it. And I think that message is really struck with the community. They understand that's how we're operating. and being able to see that we're closed as a building for 5 months, but we still get people pouring in with memberships and donations and financial investment. We're still getting sponsors for programs.
Fantastic.
Like that, just that realization, because you kind of know that when you're operating and you're in the fight, every day, and the world is alive, and it's a scrappy nonprofit world. I mean, no one should, I think, go away from saying like you have to be both a MacGyver and a Street Fighter to be a nonprofit executive director. Like that is like literally, it's bloodied noses and like paperclip and gum. So it's a hard world out there, even with the best of the jobs. And I'm incredibly blessed with an amazing staff, amazing job. I get to do history, which is my actual field of training. But it is a hard time, and there are days that I feel just completely defeated sometimes. But through the pandemic, every time, people have supported us, they've invested, our staff has been amazing, and just knowing that through that, like, makes the other side just seem like just unbelievable world of possibility, knowing the strength we actually have as an institution and the investment and support we have from the community. Just that right there, knowing that, just seeing it through this, like, we're gonna just do incredible things once we're able to fully engage in our mission again.
That's a fantastic answer, man.
How far out are you guys thinking in regards to developing new things, new revenue streams, given that we don't know how long we're going to be out here doing what we have to do? Have you given any thought to maybe like a reservation to come in and view the museum, like a couple families at a time or one family at a time for a certain charge, things like that, or just anything, that you guys are doing in the future? Yeah,
per the rules, we can't do that.
Okay.
So we can't do any public. We can do office-y things and maintain our institution.
Record podcasts.
Yeah, we can have access for certain things, but we cannot open to the public in any manner for pay or anything like that of that sort. So
hopefully, until the governor comes and knocks on Ben's door.
yeah,
Canope did it.
Of course. Go to the gangsta of Hazelden.
Exactly.
And our philosophy is like, we want the best result for the community always. And if the best result for the community is we don't open till next spring, we're going to do what we need to do to make that happen. And we are more than a building. We are a advocate for history and memory, and people see that. So the building being closed is disappointing because we do have wonderful award-winning exhibits. Yeah, right. Our music exhibit just won an award through the Washington State Museum Association. But that's not the core of what we do, and I think people recognize that. And we are looking at other revenue opportunities. We're looking at some merch ideas and things to be able to start selling some different merchandising. And then we're looking at digital components to really just push membership even more. And then we feel like Give More 24, we do what's called History-a-thon. So, like, I'm a big fan of old school, like, Jerry Lewis, like, 24-hour stand-in doing the telethon thing, and so we call it History-a-thon. So for 12 straight hours, I just do one interview after another, and I don't stop. I don't go eat. I don't do nothing. I put my body on the line for this institution. And this came actually from what was called Tourpocalypse, which was all of our walking tours of downtown Vancouver in succession for 12 straight hours. So I just kept walking and never stopped for 12 straight hours. And I basically had my cell phone with a bike helmet and a selfie stick taped to my head, and I walked around downtown, and it was called Tourpocalypse. And so we decided we wanted to keep my knees good, so we do History-a-thon now, and we think History-a-thon is going to be big this year. We think we're going to get a lot of donations, and people are going to support us. We already have a matching donor for it already, and then also our end of year giving campaign where we send emails and we do digital stuff, just saying, hey, help us as we close out the year. We think we're gonna do well, because when this happened, we kind of pulled back for a little while and said, we're not going to ask people to renew their memberships because we don't know if they just lost their jobs, and we're not going to ask people to just donate right now. And we lost our big gala dinner that we would normally do. We just said, we're gonna, out of the respect of the community and wanting what's best, we're just gonna say this isn't going to happen this year. We're going to do it next year. And I think people understood and saw that we were understanding that people were hurting. And there were resources in our community such as food shelters, or food banks, shelters, clothing, just general job assistance that really they needed to be the front of the line. And if we could hold out, we would, and we did. And so in September when we do Give More 24, and in November and December when we do End of Year, we're just going to say, hey, give an extra $50 and just help us out a little bit more. And let's go into 21 good, and let's all move forward. And we feel really good about it, and we feel we're in a good position because we've been really respectful of all the requirements, staying closed. We've wanted to do what's best for the community. We've adhered to all of that kind of things because we think that's important to be a team player in that. And then we've also provided a massive amount of fun, interesting, engaging, and thought-compelling content during this time, and still held to our obligations, because that women's history exhibit was said to open on August 21st, 2020, and that exhibit will be up in that gallery, and no one will be able to see it on August 21st, 2020, because a museum pays its debts. So we are holding to our obligations and what we've promised to do, and I think the community recognizes that.
I'll be certainly checking out this streaming stuff that you guys got going on. That's pretty cool.
So you talked about your training that you have. Training in history, political history, I believe, was your concentration. Is that right?
Constitutional and labor, yeah.
Constitutional and labor history. So I'm interested to hear how you ended up here at the museum. You said you started as a volunteer, so maybe just walk us through, if you would, sort of the journey. When you got your degree in history, and then how did you end up here, and then just talk a little bit about the journey to where you are today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In 2010, my wife, she started her career as a nurse. She's an amazing nurse. And she turned to me and said, you should go do something you like. And it wasn't human resources and payroll anymore. I'll thank every day the company that had me hired and that I had the job and I was able to put my wife through school, but wasn't my passion in life. So I started my bachelor's in history at WCU Vancouver, and like I said, that first class just completely opened my mind and opened my eyes to what history really was. And in the first semester that I was there, or quarter, however that is, I ended up having an opportunity to find out that the Clark County Historical Museum needed volunteers for what was called a Harvest Fun Day event. And this was one that used to be at the Heritage Farm, and essentially it was this big agricultural festival that would be, produced up there. And I got staffed right away as one of these young history students as at the scarecrow booth, helping people put together scarecrows. And this was basically providing clothes and straw to people. And I did this for the entire day. And after that day, I came back and said, hey, I'd love to be an intern. And they usually throw the newbies at the booth into the scarecrow booth to see if they'll, not come back. And they said, great, you'll come back. We'll bring you on as an intern. So I started as an intern, and every Friday and Saturday for an entire year, I worked for free for class credit also. And at the end of that year, the director had started Susan Tissot, who was the director who hired me, got me into some walking tours and doing some other stuff. And she saw that I was here all the time doing as much as I could and said, I'd like to hire you on as a job share. So she hired me on as the visitor services assistant, and I shared a position at about 12 hours a week for about a year or two while I was still going and getting my bachelor's. Then eventually I completed my bachelor's at WCU Vancouver and went and started my master's degree in what's called public history at Portland State University. And eventually the person who was in the job share position, Karen Washbaugh, she ended up retiring, and I took on her full 32 hours a week. And doing that for a while, I became what was called the Museum Experience Coordinator.
What year was that? Was it still?
2012.
Okay.
So I became the Museum Experience Coordinator at this time.
Woo, that's pretty heavy duty. Nice.
Yeah. And if you ever Google that position at any museum, it doesn't exist. Because essentially the director saw that I could do a lot of things like marketing, exhibits, all kinds of stuff. So it was this made-up position so that I could just do whatever.
Bradley, can I share that I got promoted once upon a time to Customer Experience Director, and now I am the co-host of a podcast. So I understand.
Well, made up positions are great because you gotta make your own path.
The path led me here.
Follow
And
the path.
we have Canope.
And,
And then you have me.
and then we have Canope.
Somehow that path led to Hazeldale, right?
So eventually I transitioned from that. I got my master's degree in public history, which when I say public history, it basically, the way that works is that we get training in formal history. So that's my constitutional and labor piece is my formal training. And then the other half, public history, is actually where they make you produce academic level history, but for like programs or exhibits or tours. So we kind of get trained in almost what's like history marketing. So all the stuff that I do now, I take academic level research writing and understanding, and then I distill it down into like a panel or something for the public. So we're a bridge kind of between academic and the public. So I got my master's in that, became the curator here, and then eventually the director position opened up, and I applied, and it's a fundraising position, and I had a little fundraising experience in my background, but I just kind of told them about my vision in the interview, and that same day we went to lunch and they offered me the job, and I transitioned from a historian to a administrator and fundraiser, which I was an administrator back when I was younger in my 20s, and I said I'll never be the boss again, and here I am. But I'm the boss for some really good people, and they believe in what we're doing, so I don't mind being their boss.
And how long have you been in this position?
The end of this month will be 3 years as the director.
What really strikes me, and again, and Ben and I have Canope, we've all talked about, we've never stepped foot in here. But what struck me right out of the gate was the way you seem to build exhibits and the way you talk about the history and your commitment to being interactive and your commitment to accessibility of your exhibits and your collection and the things that you guys show here at the museum. That was one of the first things that was really striking as soon as we walked in. I'm curious, is that Bradley's vision? Is that part of the Clark County Historical Museum's brand? Is that something that you sort of inherited? Or is that something, where does that come from? Because I think that's really important for not big history people like me, not big museum guys like me, but to be able to walk in and feel like I really am part of it just that fast.
Yeah.
is a really important element. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you brought to the table, or is that more part of the culture and the brand that you guys have developed over the last 50 years?
I would say it started with two people specifically. One, Pat Gelata, who is a local historian, in the way that she delivered stories and let people tell their stories in the community. And she was involved with the museum for years, and she still she works with me from time to time on things. And she is our local Vancouver Clark County historian, and her way of having people have access to storytelling and feeling like they could inform her stories. That I think was the first piece for the institution and the community that I think I recognized. And then the second piece was Susan Tussaud, who hired me as the director, is that in her work, like we worked together on a labor exhibit, which was like right at my wheelhouse,
Sure.
right in my wheelhouse, because I understood the functions of the labor history. And she reached out to the labor community, and that was the first exhibit I ever saw in my entire time at museums where the thank you panel was just lists of names. It was all these individual contributors. It was all these unions that maybe they can't afford a $500 corporate sponsorship, but they could give $100 or $50 or $25. And it was just like this community piece. And then also reaching out and saying, like, we don't have to have the objects in our collection, but we can borrow them from the community. And so both with Pat's accessibility of story and this kind of like community discourse vision, and then Susan with this accessibility and this kind of like exhibit that was being able to access by the community, those two things really resonated with me, and they were part of the culture of this institution. And then once I was in the position of director, I was like, let's just swing for the fences on this stuff. Like, let's make this the real participation museum. Like most of the participatory museum stuff that I've seen is a lot of like come into the exhibit and put a Post-it up that like you leave a memory. And I think that was hugely valuable. And the person who, worked and created that did an amazing job for the industry. But I think we need to go a next step further and say, come and help me write a panel, or come and loan an object. And I think Susan and Pat both modeled that for me. And I've just stood on their shoulders and taken what they were already walking forward and doing and just expanded it as much as I can. And there's good and struggles with all of that, because it's cooks in the kitchen. Sometimes you get so many people in, you're like, oh wow, I've really bit off more than I can chew and trying to like understand this. But I think through those struggles, and sometimes even hard and difficult conversations with people about the stories and the history, and sometimes when you disagree or you totally agree or whatever, you actually are learning more as an institution on what the community values, what the people who own the history, because like people own these stories and own this legacy. Like you own the legacy of Hazeldale. Like that's, whether you want it or not.
He is the legacy of
Hazeldale.
The old rebel district, as
I
we
have a feeling
as we call it.
I love it.
So
I have a feeling Pat would have something more to say about that.
Yeah.
However, speaking of that, she's written a book or two, has she not, in the local community as well?
Quite a few.
Yeah.
She's written books on Vancouver, on legendary locals of the city. She wrote the book on Camas. She's The Darkness Next Door, which is a book that we have here, is the ghost story book, naming Clark County. She produced a book about the murder of Joanne Dewey, which was an infamous murder that happened in the community. And she's done all kinds of stuff. Pat has wrote a lot of the books on Vancouver and Camas and other areas.
I want to ask you about curating exhibits or choosing exhibits. I think it's interesting that you have exhibits that are going to be shown for 2 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked briefly upstairs where you were saying, this exhibit is in here now, and it's an award-winning exhibit, and then we're going to replace it with the next exhibit, and then we're going to have this exhibit. So you're almost 10 years down the road of the exhibits that you're going to have inside of the museum, which I thought was really interesting, because when you first started talking, I'm like, oh, well, they'll have this here for 6 months, and then they'll bring in another one. But that timeline was really interesting to me. So maybe just kind of talk through the process of, how do you find ideas for exhibits? How do you ultimately choose what exhibits you're going to put in? And then what does that curation process look like? Like, how long does it take? Where do you go to try to find the different pieces for the exhibits? Again, because we're still so far out from some of these exhibits, just kind of talk us through that process a little bit.
Yeah, part of the process, there's multiple opportunities for us. So some of the ones are like, what is a significant anniversary that's coming up? That's always a nice big one for us. Like, that's been a favorite of the last couple of years. The brewing exhibit is the 100th anniversary of the start of Prohibition. We opened it on to the day, 100 years after Prohibition was enacted.
Oh,
like,
very cool.
just having
That is cool.
They were kind to us 100 years ago, and they planned it to be in 2020 on a Friday, so it worked perfect out for us. And then the Women's History exhibit is because it's the 100th anniversary this year of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, where women were able to get in Constitution the right to vote. And so those two pieces right there, anniversaries, are very helpful. And then we try to look at contemporary, sometimes things that are happening. So the ports exhibit that we have specifically is because we had this massive port development, and we said, well, our role is to lay down the context of like, why is this even important that we have this massive development and change in the port? And then also just looking at, what we have in the collection. We have musical objects in the collection. The music exhibit kind of bore out of that. And then just discussing broader topics that would bring people in and engage them. So, it's always kind of a messy process. And we also listen to the community and what the community is, talking about, or points of interest is kind of a part of that process. And then they just kind of organically bubble up, and eventually we're like, yep, this one seems like it's going to stick. And like the sports, recreation, leisure one, it's like, we have a lot of stuff happening. We have the Raptors coming in, there's a lot of sports athletes in the community. There's a lot of things people do for leisure and recreation. We're going to talk about cruising culture and all that kind of stuff. You know, those things just end up bubbling up, and you're like, let's do this. And we're trying to have stuff that appeals to a broad segment of the community so that people come in and they do see what you see, which is, oh, wow, this is an active place that has engaging things that I want to participate in, but also gives me an opportunity. We had one that was called Clark County Stories that was individual panels about people across our community from all different communities, coming from various backgrounds, and just talking about what their life story was. So, you know, it's not just, you know, fun and kind of like rah-rah stuff, but it's also sometimes very thoughtful conversations that allow to give broader context to what our community, you know, who's in our community and the history of those individuals.
Very cool. And, you know, even though you may have an exhibit up for 2 or 3 or 4 years, you shared with us earlier that you leave some room for the evolution of those exhibits. So on day one, it doesn't look the exact same as it does on the last day. So maybe just talk about kind of the draft and then how you add on and how you evolve the exhibits as they're actually presented.